She pulled a thick stack of $100 bills out of her purse and threw them into the air, right there in the marble lobby, and they rained down around the man in the blue suit, while 40 employees watched and a man in a green suit smirked behind her. "There," she said loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "That's what your father's precious claim is worth. That's what your whole family is worth. Get on your knees, pick it up, and get out of my building, and don't ever come back begging again." The man in the blue suit did not move. He did not kneel. He did not reach for a single bill. He looked at the money scattered across the polished floor, and then he looked at the woman in red, and he said very quietly, "I'm not here to beg. I'm here for the 10 o'clock board meeting." Because what Regina Kane did not know what she was about to learn in the most catastrophic way possible was that the man she had just thrown money at like a beggar had, as of 9 o'clock that morning, become the majority owner of the company whose lobby she was standing in. She had just humiliated her own new boss. Stay with me all the way to the end of this one, because you are about to watch the most arrogant woman in that building, learn who actually holds the power, and then watch the man she humiliated make a choice about mercy that nobody in that lobby saw coming. And if a story about dignity, patience, and what a good man does when he finally holds all the cards moves you, hit subscribe and ring that bell right now, because these stories get buried and you are the reason they get found. His name was David Okoye, and he had waited 11 years for a 10 o'clock meeting. And to understand the meeting, you have to understand his father, because everything David became, he became because of a man named Emeka Okoye and a debt that a powerful company decided it did not have to pay. Emeka Okoye had come to this country with nothing but a trade and a willingness to work that frightened lazier men. He was a builder, a specialist in a particular kind of industrial construction, and he was very good at it. So good that a growing company called Kane Industrial began to hire his small firm as a subcontractor again and again over the years for the difficult jobs that needed a craftsman. Emeka built well, and he charged fairly, and he trusted people because he himself was trustworthy and assumed the same of others, which is the oldest and most dangerous mistake an honest man can make. Over 6 years, Emeka Okoye's little firm did more and more work for Kane Industrial, and as it did, Kane Industrial paid slower and slower. This is a thing large companies do to small ones, and it is a kind of quiet violence because a small firm cannot float a large one's unpaid bills for long. Emeka carried the receivables trusting because the Kanes always assured him the money was coming, that they valued him, that they were family. And then Kane Industrial, in the middle of the largest project Emeka had ever taken on having strung him along until his firm was fully committed and fully exposed, simply refused to pay. They invented deficiencies in work that had passed every inspection. They claimed breaches that had never happened. There was a meeting near the end that David heard about years later from one of his father's old workers, and it tells you everything about the two families whose collision made this story. Emeka Okoye, still believing that fairness was possible if he could just get in front of the right person, had requested a meeting with the Kanes to resolve the unpaid money man to man. He put on his one good suit. He brought a folder with every signed contract, every inspection report, every invoice organized with the care of a craftsman, because Emeka believed that the truth clearly presented would win. And the founder, old man Kane, Regina's father, had let him wait 45 minutes in a lobby, this same marble lobby, and had then sent down a junior lawyer, not even himself, to tell Emeka Okoye that the company disputed the work, that he was free to sue if he liked, and that everyone knew a man like him could not afford to. And Emeka had stood in that lobby holding his careful folder and his good suit, and understood that the folder meant nothing, that the truth meant nothing, that the only thing that had ever meant anything was power, which he did not have, and they did. I went home, and he did not speak for 2 days. His son never forgot it, and 11 years later that son would stand in the exact same lobby, and this time the folder would be a controlling interest, and this time the truth would have power behind it, because David Okoye had learned the one lesson his father died learning, which is that in this world, truth without power is just a man in a good suit holding a folder no one will read. And when Emeka protested when he brought his careful records and his signed contracts, they did the thing that powerful companies do to honest men, which is that they buried him in lawyers because they knew. And he learned that being right is worthless if you cannot afford to prove it against an opponent with unlimited money and unlimited time. It destroyed him. Not just financially, though it did, that the unpaid money was more than Emeka's firm could survive losing, and the firm collapsed, and the workers he employed lost their jobs, and Emeka lost the house he had put up to make payroll while he waited for money that never came. It destroyed him in a deeper way. Emeka Okoye had believed in something, believed that if a man was honest and skilled and did what he promised, the world would deal with him fairly, and Kane Industrial did not just steal his money, they stole that belief. And a man can survive losing his money far more easily than he can survive losing his faith in the fairness of the world. Emeka spent the last years of his life fighting a case he could not afford to win, growing smaller and more bitter and more broken, and he died. Still fighting it of a heart attack that his son always believed was really just a heart that had been asked to hold more disappointment than any heart is built to hold. Let me give you one picture of Emeka so that he is a man to you and not just a wronged name, because David carried this picture his whole life. When David was a boy, Emeka used to take him to the job sites on Saturdays, and Emeka would run his hand along a weld or a beam he had made and say, "Look at that, David, that will be standing when you are an old man. When they cheat you on the money, and they will try remember that they can take the money, but they can never take the fact that you built it right. The building doesn't care who got paid. The building only cares whether the man who made it was honest, and this one was." Emeka Okoye believed that honest work was a kind of permanence, a way of putting truth into the world that no thief could steal, and he taught his son to believe it. And it is the reason David never became bitter the way his father's enemies were bitter, because David had been raised to locate his worth in the quality of what he built, and not in what the powerful decided to pay him for it. That belief was Emeka's real inheritance to his son, worth more than any contract, and it was the thing that let David spend 11 years in the presence of his enemy's world without being poisoned by it. David was 19 when his father died, and at the funeral, a representative of Kane Industrial actually had the audacity to send a small floral arrangement and a card of condolence, and David Okoye stood over his father's grave and made a promise not of revenge exactly, but of correction. He promised that the debt would be paid, not for the money. His father had died over the money, and David understood that the money had never really been the point. He promised because his father had died believing the world was a place where the powerful could steal from the honest and face nothing. And David was going to spend his life proving his father wrong about that one terrible thing was going to make the world fair for Emeka Okoye. Even if it took his whole life, because his father had deserved to die believing in something and had been robbed even of that. Here is what David did with the 11 years that followed, and it is a story of patience so complete it is almost frightening. He did not file a lawsuit. He had watched a lawsuit kill his father. He knew that the courts for a man without money were just another room where the powerful won. Instead, David Okoye decided that the only language Kane Industrial understood was power, and that he would spend however many years it took to acquire more of it than they had. I was brilliant, and he was driven by a grief that never slept, and he went into business and then into finance and investment, and he was disciplined in a way that only the truly motivated can be. He did not spend. He did not announce himself. He built capital and knowledge and above all patience. There were years in the middle of that stretch when the patience nearly broke him, and it is worth telling because patience looks noble from the outside, and from the inside it is mostly pain. There were times David could have moved early, could have made a smaller, cruder strike at Kane Industrial, could have gotten some partial revenge and some partial satisfaction. And the temptation was enormous because grief wants to act. Grief hates waiting. Grief tells you every single day that another day of the guilty walking free is a day your father goes unavenged. David's mother, who was the wisest person he knew, watched her son turn himself into a weapon over those years, and one night she sat him down and said the thing that steadied him. "Your father did not raise a killer," she told him. "He raised a builder, and I need you to promise me that when the day comes, and it is coming, I can see it coming, you will not do to that woman's people what her people did to us. Because if you do, I will have lost your father to their cruelty and lost you to it too, and I could not survive that. Beat them, David, but beat them as your father's son, not as their student." David promised her the way he had once promised his father at the grave, and he held the promise through 3 more years of buying and waiting, and it was his mother's voice as much as his father's that stood beside him in the lobby on the morning the money came down. And somewhere in those 11 years, David Okoye began very quietly through entities that could not be traced back to him, to study Kane Industrial the way a surgeon studies a body he intends to operate on. He learned its finances, its weaknesses, its debts. He learned that the company, decades after cheating his father, had grown fat and complacent under the leadership of the founder's daughter, Regina Kane, a woman who had inherited the company and its ruthlessness, but not the founder's shrewdness, and who had over years loaded the company with debt to fund an extravagant lifestyle and a series of vain acquisitions. He learned that Kane Industrial, for all its marble lobby and its arrogance, was overextended and vulnerable, a balloon inflated by borrowed money. And David Okoye, patiently over the last 3 years of his campaign, began to buy. He bought the company's debt position by position through his web of untraceable vehicles. He bought its shares quietly, never enough at once to trigger an alarm, accumulating a position through nominees and holding companies that no one connected to a man named Okoye. He was doing to Regina Kane with infinitely more skill exactly what her father had done to David's father, except that David was not stealing anything. He was buying in the open market at fair prices every instrument of control over the company that had destroyed his family until the morning came 11 years after his father's funeral, when David Okoye held enough debt and enough shares to take control of Kane Industrial completely, and all that remained was a 10 o'clock board meeting to make it formal. That is why David Okoye walked into the marble lobby of Kane Industrial that morning in a blue suit carrying a briefcase, calm, 11 years in the making. He had an appointment. He was expected in the boardroom at 10. The transfer of control had cleared at 9. How as though almost no one in the building yet knew it. The new owner of everything around him walking into his own lobby for the first time across the same marble floor where his father had once stood in his one good suit, holding a folder no one would read. And Regina Kane recognized his name. That was the spark that lit the whole catastrophe, and it is worth noticing that her downfall began not with David's power, but with her own contempt. Because if she had simply let the man go up to his meeting, she would have kept her dignity to the end. Instead, her arrogance reached out and pulled the roof down on her own head. Not his face. She had never seen David's face. But when he gave his name at the security desk, David Okoye here for the 10 o'clock meeting. A longtime executive standing nearby heard it, and the name Okoye rang a very old, very unpleasant bell, because Kane Industrial had a long institutional memory for the people it had wronged, the way guilty institutions do, and someone said quietly to Regina that an Okoye was here, and Regina's memory supplied the rest. The Okoyes, the subcontractor from years ago, the family that had made all that fuss about being owed money, that had sued and lost, that her father had crushed, that popped up now and then over the years with letters and demands that the company's lawyers swatted away. And here was one of them in her lobby, an Okoye, asking to come up. Regina Kane made an assumption, and it was an assumption built on decades of never once being wrong about who had power and who did not. She assumed that this David Okoye was the son or grandson of that troublesome subcontractor come to beg again to reopen the old grievance, to try to shake loose some money from the company that had beaten his family a decade ago. She assumed he was a nobody, another Okoye with his hand out, and she decided, in the way that arrogant people decide these things, that she was going to make an example of him publicly in the lobby in front of her staff, so that the whole company would see how Regina Kane dealt with beggars, and so that no Okoye would ever have the nerve to walk into her building again. She came down to the lobby herself. That was how sure she was. She came down in her red blazer with her smirking deputy, a man named Grant, in a green suit trailing behind her, and 40 employees in the open lobby watched their CEO stride toward the man in the blue suit. And David Okoye watched her come, this woman. He had studied for 3 years and never met the daughter of the man who had sent a junior lawyer down to break his father in this very room, and he felt the old grief rise, and he let his mother's voice steady. It beat them as your father's son. And he stood perfectly still with his briefcase in his hand and waited to see what she would do, and Regina Kane did not even let him speak. "Let me guess," she said, loud, performing for the floor. "Another Okoye. Come to cry about money your family thinks it's owed. Do you people ever stop? My father dealt with your father years ago. The matter is closed. It has been closed for a decade. But since you've come all this way, let me settle it for you once and for all, in a way even you will understand." And she opened her purse, and she pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills, and she threw them into the air. They fluttered down around David Okoye in the marble lobby, and Regina Kane raised her voice so the whole floor could hear it. There That's what your father's precious claim is worth. That's what your whole family is worth. Get on your knees, pick it up, and get out of my building, and don't ever come back begging again." The lobby went silent. 40 employees stood frozen, and somewhere in that silence, an older security guard by the door lowered his eyes. Because he had worked that lobby for 20 years, and he had seen the Kanes do cruel things before, and he hated it, and he had never once been able to say so. Grant, the deputy in the green suit, smirked, because that was what you did when Regina Kane performed her power. You smirked along. A young woman from the accounting floor, mortified, actually bent down, partway out of some reflex to tidy the terrible mess, and then stopped herself. The money lay scattered across the polished stone, and David Okoye did not move. I want you to picture him, because this is the whole story. A man in a blue suit standing perfectly still in a rain of thrown money. 40 people watching, being told to kneel. Every instinct that poverty and grief install in a person was surely screaming at some level of him. But David Okoye had spent 11 years becoming a man who did not have to kneel for anyone, and he had learned from watching his father die on his knees before this exact company that the one thing you must never do, the one thing that lets them win, is reach for the money they throw at you. His father had spent his life reaching, trusting, begging the system for the fairness it would not give. David was done reaching. He would not touch a single bill. He looked at the money on the floor. Then he looked at Regina Kane, and he said very quietly in a voice that somehow carried across the whole silent lobby, "I'm not here to beg. And I'm not going to pick that up, because I don't kneel for anyone, and certainly not for you. I'm here for the 10 o'clock board meeting." He paused. "You should be there too, Ms. Kane. I think you're going to want to hear what's on the agenda." Something flickered across Regina's face, the first hairline crack in her certainty. "The board meeting is a private matter of this company's ownership," she snapped. "You have no business anywhere near it. Security." "The board meeting," David said, "is about the transfer of majority control of Kane Industrial, which cleared at 9 o'clock this morning, to me." He let it land. "My name is David Okoye. Yes, I'm Emeka Okoye's son, and as of an hour ago I own the controlling interest in this company. I hold your debt, Ms. Kane. I hold your shares. I hold the note on this building. You have just thrown money at and ordered to kneel in front of your entire staff, the man who owns everything you're standing in. So no. I won't be picking it up, but you might want to, because in about an hour you're going to need it a great deal more than I do. If your breath just caught, if you need to see the woman in the red blazer, understand what she has done, that feeling is exactly what this channel is built for, and the only way we keep making these is your tap on that subscribe button. Do it right now, and watch the lobby turn. It is an extraordinary thing to watch certainty leave a person's face, and everyone in that lobby watched it leave Regina Kane's. The color drained from her cheeks, her mouth opened and closed. And behind her, Grant. The deputy in the green suit stopped smirking, because Grant was quicker than his boss, and Grant had already done the arithmetic and understood that the woman he had been smirking in support of had just committed an act of public humiliation against the new owner of the company, and that being associated with her right now was the most dangerous place in the building to stand. And Grant, being the kind of man who smirks on command, began physically to edge away from Regina Kane, a small betrayal that told you everything about the world. Regina had built around herself a world of people who would abandon her the instant her power flickered. "That's not possible," Regina said, but her voice had lost all its volume. "The ownership of this company, the shares are held by there's no single buyer. It's dispersed. My bankers would have told me." "Your bankers didn't know," David said, "because I was careful the way your father was careful when he strung my father along until he was too committed to walk away. I bought through vehicles you couldn't trace a little at a time for 3 years. And I bought your debt from lenders who were happy to be rid of an overextended borrower, and I assembled control so quietly that the first you'd hear of it was this morning's notice, which is sitting unread in your inbox because you were too busy coming down here to throw money at a beggar to check your email." He glanced at the money on the floor. "You've been running this company on borrowed money and inherited arrogance for years, Ms. Kane. You made it vulnerable. I just walked through the door you left open. There's a certain justice in that, I think. Your father took my father's company by being ruthless and patient. I took yours the same way, except that I did it by buying it fair and square in the open market, which is more than your family ever offered mine." The lobby was utterly silent now, 40 employees watching their world reorder itself in real time. And here is where the story becomes about who David Okoye actually was, because he now held absolute power over the woman who had just tried to make him kneel, and over the company that had destroyed his father. And everyone in that lobby and everyone hearing this now expects the hammer to fall. This is a revenge story you've been promised. This is the moment David Okoye annihilates Regina Kane, has her thrown out of the building the way she tried to throw him out. Salts the earth, takes everything the way his family had everything taken. That is not what David Okoye did. And the reason is the reason his father's memory demanded, and it is the whole point. David walked forward, and he crouched down, and everyone tensed, thinking he was finally going to pick up the money after all. He didn't. He picked up one single bill, and he held it, and he stood back up, and he spoke not just to Regina now, but to the whole lobby, to the 40 employees, because what he had to say was for all of them. "My father, Emeka Okoye, built things with his hands," David said. "He was a craftsman and an honest man, and this company strung him along and cheated him and buried him in lawyers until it broke him, and he died believing that the world was a place where the powerful could steal from the honest and never pay for it. I have spent 11 years, and everything I am proving him wrong. And this morning, standing in this lobby, I could make him right again, because I could do to Regina Kane exactly what her family did to mine. I could throw her out. I could make her kneel. I could destroy her and everyone loyal to her and call it justice. And a lot of people would say she has it coming." He looked at the single bill in his hand. "But if I do that, then my father was right. Then the world really is just a place where power crushes whoever it can, and the only thing that ever changes is whose turn it is to hold the whip. And I did not spend 11 years of my life to prove that my father was right about the worst thing he ever believed. I spent 11 years to prove he was wrong." He turned to Regina Kane, and there was no cruelty in his face, and somehow that was more devastating than any cruelty could have been. "So here is what's going to happen, Ms. Kane, and it isn't up for negotiation, because I own this company and you no longer do. You're not going to kneel, and I'm not going to make you. I don't need to see you on the floor. I saw enough people on their knees in my childhood." He set the single bill down on the security desk. "First, every family this company ever cheated, the way it cheated mine, is going to be found and paid back in full, with interest out of company funds, starting with the Okoye claim, which will be paid to my father's estate, not because I need the money, God knows, but because it is owed, and a debt that is owed gets paid, and that principle is the only thing I've ever actually wanted from this building. Second, the people who work here, these people watching who had nothing to do with any of this, keep their jobs, because I am not in the business of punishing the innocent for the sins of the powerful. That's your family's business, not mine. And third, you." He looked at her. "You're going to leave today, not thrown out, not on your knees. You'll be removed from your position with your dignity, which is more than you offered me and more than you deserve, and you'll keep enough to live on, and you'll walk out of here on your own 2 feet. Because I'm not going to become the thing that killed my father in order to avenge him. That would be his final defeat, and I won't hand it to him. You get to keep your dignity. Ms. Kane, precisely because you tried to take mine, and I want you to think about that every day for the rest of your life. That's the whole of my revenge. It's that you'll always know I could have destroyed you and chose to be better than your family, and that the difference between us is the difference you spent this morning betting didn't exist." And then David Okoye did the thing that I think about most, the small poetic thing that turned the whole lobby. He looked at the money still scattered across the marble floor, the money Regina had thrown at him, and he turned to the young woman from the accounting floor who had reflexively started to pick it up, and he said gently, "Don't you kneel for it either. None of you. That money got thrown in this lobby to make a man feel small. So we're not going to let it do that. Gather it up, please, all of it, and add it to the fund that's going to pay back the families this company cheated. Let money that was thrown to humiliate somebody become money that makes wronged people whole. That seems right to me." And 40 employees slowly, then all at once, moved to gather up the scattered bills. Not kneeling in humiliation, but working together in something that felt strangely like a kind of ceremony, turning an act of contempt into an act of repair. And Regina Kane stood alone in the middle of it, in her red blazer, watching her own cruelty be transformed into its opposite by the man she had thrown it at, and that more than any destruction was the thing that broke her. The 10 o'clock meeting happened, of course, because the machinery of ownership does not pause for a scene in a lobby. David Okoye rode the elevator up to the top floor of the building he now owned, and he walked into the boardroom where 11 years earlier the decisions had been made to bury his father, and he sat down at the head of the table in the chair that had been Regina Kane's an hour before, and the board of Kane Industrial hastily assembled ashen. Having by now all heard what had happened downstairs, sat and listened as the transfer of control was made formal and irreversible. Regina came to the meeting. She did not have to. Her presence changed nothing legally. But she came because some part of her still could not believe it was real until she saw it done, and she sat at the far end of the table she had ruled, and she watched David Okoye be confirmed as the controlling owner of everything her family had built and stolen, and Grant, her deputy in the green suit, sat conspicuously on the far side of the room, from her now having completed his migration to the new center of gravity with the shamelessness of his kind. David watched Grant do it, and he made a quiet note to himself about exactly what Grant was. Because a man who abandons his patron, the instant her power flickers, is not a man you keep close. Whatever his talents, and David, who had been raised on loyalty, had no use for the Grants of the world, and would ease him out within the year. When the formalities were done, David looked down the long table at Regina Kane, and the room braced, expecting him to finish her off with words now that the papers were signed. He didn't. He simply said, "Thank you for coming. It was the more dignified choice, and I noticed it. You can collect your personal things this afternoon. You'll be given the time and the privacy to do it properly. The severance we discussed downstairs stands." And that was all. He turned to the business of the company, and Regina Kane sat there for a moment longer, waiting for a cruelty that never came, and then she understood that it was truly never going to come, that this was the whole of it, that the man had meant exactly what he said in the lobby, and she rose and left the boardroom on her own 2 feet, and the door closed behind her, and that was the end of the Kane family's 40 years of running that company on other people's broken faith. Now let me tell you what happened after, because the ending held. David Okoye took control of Kane Industrial, and the first thing he did before anything else, before a single strategic decision about the business, was to make good on what he had said in the lobby. His people found every subcontractor, every small firm, every honest builder. The company had cheated over the decades, and there were many, because a company that will cheat one Emeka Okoye will cheat 100, and each of them was paid back in full with interest, and some of them had died like Emeka, and the money went to their estates and their widows and their children, and letters came back, dozens of them, from people who had spent years believing that the world was a place where the powerful could steal from the honest and never pay, and who now held in their hands the proof that this once at least they had been wrong. David read every letter. He said they were worth more to him than the whole company. One of them he kept framed. It came from the widow of another subcontractor, a man named Salazar, who had been cheated by Kane Industrial 2 years before Emeka was, and who had died. Like Emeka, still fighting for it, leaving a wife and 3 children with nothing but debt and a grievance no one would hear. The check David's people sent her was the full amount with a decade of interest, and it was more money than she had seen in her life, and her letter did not really talk about the money at all. It said in a shaking hand, "For 11 years my children have believed that their father was a failure, because that is what the world told them, that he lost his business and lost our house and lost his health chasing money, that important people said he was never owed. Today I was able to put this letter in front of my grown son and show him that his father was right all along, that he was cheated, that he was honest and they were thieves, and that a stranger who never met him made it right. You did not just send us money, Mr. Okoye. You gave my children back their father. You made him a man they can be proud of again, instead of a cautionary tale. I did not know that was a thing that could be given back. God bless you for knowing it could." David framed that letter and hung it in his office next to the only photograph he had of his own father on a job site, running his hand along a weld, and the two of them together were the whole reason he had spent 11 years of his life on a 10 o'clock meeting. The Okoye claim was paid to Emeka's estate, which is to say to David and his mother, and David did not keep it. He used it to establish a fund in his father's name that provided legal support to the small contractors and honest working people being ground down by powerful companies in exactly the way his father had been ground down, so that the next Emeka Okoye would not have to die on his knees for lack of money to prove he was right. It was David, said the only monument his father would have wanted, which was other honest men getting the fair fight that Emeka never got. The company itself under David became something its founder would not have recognized, and its cheated subcontractors could scarcely believe a company that paid its small suppliers on time, that dealt fairly, that understood, because its owner understood it in his bones, that the honest craftsman at the bottom of the contract is a human being with a family and a faith in the world that can be stolen. The 40 employees who had watched the lobby kept their jobs and told the story of that morning for the rest of their careers, and the company that had been built on a founder's ruthlessness slowly became known under his victim's son as the fairest large firm in its industry, which is a kind of justice so complete and so quiet that Emeka Okoye, wherever he was, must have finally been able to rest. And Regina Kane, she left that day on her own 2 feet with her dignity and enough to live on exactly as David had said. She was never a Titan again. The world she had lorded over dissolved, and the smirking deputies like Grant scattered to attach themselves to other sources of power, because that is what they do. What David had predicted came true. She spent the rest of her life knowing that she had been utterly in the power of the man she had humiliated, and that he had chosen mercy, and that the mercy was the sharpest thing he could possibly have done, because it left her nothing to be a victim of. No cruelty to nurse, no grievance to hide behind, only the clean and permanent knowledge that a man she had thrown money at had turned out to be a better human being than she was, and had proven it in front of everyone. I do not know whether it changed her. Some people cannot be changed, only shown. But she was shown thoroughly in a marble lobby, and she carried it out the door with her, and I suspect it was heavier than any money. David went to his father's grave when it was all done. He told him it was finished. He told him the debt was paid, all the debts, not just theirs. And he told him the thing he most wanted him to know, the thing his father had died not believing. "You were wrong, Pop," David said to the stone. "You died thinking the world just lets the powerful steal from the honest and never pay. And I know why you thought it. They gave you every reason. But I paid it back, all of it, to everyone. And I did it without becoming them, because you didn't raise me to become them. You raised me to build things like you did, and to keep my faith that the world can be made fair by the people who refuse to stop insisting on it. So I made it fair, for you and for everybody they did it to. The world isn't automatically fair, you were right about that. But it can be forced to be by a patient man who refuses to kneel and refuses to become a monster, and that's the whole thing you taught me, and I finally got to show you. Rest now. The debt is paid, all of it, to everyone. You are an honest man, and honest men get the last word after all, even if they have to wait a while, and even if their sons have to say it for them. You can believe again. So here's what I want to leave you with tonight. Somebody someday is going to throw money at you. Maybe not literally, though. For some of you, it will be exactly that literal. But someone with power is going to try to make you kneel, to reach, to scramble, to accept a humiliation, because they are certain you have no choice. Because they have looked at where you're standing and decided they already know exactly what you're worth. And in that moment, everything depends on 2 things. The first is whether you will refuse to kneel, whether you can stand still in the rain of thrown money and keep your own dignity in your own hands, because the one thing they are really trying to take is not your money. It's your sense that you are worth more than they've decided, and that is the one thing you never ever have to hand them. And the second thing, the harder thing, is what you do on the day the power finally shifts, the day you hold the cards, the day the person who made you kneel is standing in your lobby. Because on that day, you will find out whether you spent your struggle becoming free or whether you spent it becoming them. David Okoye held the whip his father had died under, and he set it down, and that not the ownership and not the money is why he won. He didn't just take the company, he broke the whole machine. The machine that says power is just a whip that gets passed from hand to hand, and he broke it by being the one person who wouldn't pick it up. Take back what you're owed. Pay back what's owed to others. Refuse to kneel and refuse to become the thing that tried to make you. That's the whole of it. That's how an honest man's son makes the world fair, one paid debt and one unswung whip at a time. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, because someone out there tonight is having money thrown at them, is being told to kneel, is being made to feel that where they're standing is what they're worth. And they need to hear David Okoye's story, and they need to hear that dignity is the one thing that can never be thrown on the floor unless you bend down for it. Leave a comment and tell me if you were David holding all the cards. Would you have shown Regina Kane mercy, or would you have made her kneel? I read every single one of them, and they stay with me. Until the next story. Keep your dignity in your own two hands where no one can throw it on the floor. Never once kneel for thrown money, and on the day the power finally shifts your way, and for some of you, it will remember exactly who you promised yourself you'd be back when you had nothing.